My name is Brittany, and I am 68 years old. For 45 years, Harold was my world, my rock, my everything. When cancer took him, I stood alone at his funeral, clutching a handkerchief, scanning the crowd for my son Jason, who never showed. 3 days later, my phone pinged with a text from him. "Mom, we need $500 Kelvins for a vacation home. It is for Tiffany's mother's birthday." My heart shattered all over again. If you have ever felt betrayed by someone you sacrificed everything for, let me know where you are watching from. Please like and subscribe as I share how I found strength when my world collapsed. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, the daughter of a teacher and a postal worker. My parents taught me the value of hard work, saving money, and treating people with respect. I met Harold during my sophomore year at Ohio State University. He was studying business and I was majoring in education. We bumped into each other at the campus library, where I was working part-time to help pay for my tuition. Harold was tall, with kind blue eyes and a smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. Our first date was a simple picnic by the lake. Harold brought homemade sandwiches and lemonade. We talked until sunset about our dreams and ambitions. He wanted to start his own real estate business, and I planned to teach for a few years before joining him. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. I wore a dress my mother had altered, and Harold wore his only suit. We did not have much money, but we had ambition and each other. After graduation, I taught 3rd grade, while Harold worked for a real estate company, learning the business from the ground up. At night, we would sit at our tiny kitchen table in our 1-bedroom apartment, planning our future. Harold would spread out maps of developing areas, studying trends and opportunities. 3 years into our marriage, we took a huge risk. Harold left his job, and we used our savings to open our own real estate office. It was a tiny space with second-hand furniture, but it was ours. I quit teaching to help run the administrative side of the business. Those early years were tough. Some months we barely made enough to cover our expenses, but we never gave up. 7 years after we got married, I gave birth to our son Jason. He was a beautiful baby with Harold's blue eyes and my dark hair. Our tiny apartment suddenly felt even smaller, giving us the motivation to work harder. Harold started focusing on commercial real estate, which proved to be a smart decision. By Jason's 3rd birthday, our business had grown enough that we could afford to buy our first house and hire 2 employees. As Jason grew, I noticed he was different from other children his age. While most kids were happy with simple toys, Jason always wanted the most expensive things he saw on TV. When he was 6, he threw a tantrum in a toy store because we would not buy him an elaborate electric car that cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. Harold and I were concerned, but chalked it up to a phase he would outgrow. We tried to teach Jason the same values our parents had instilled in us. Every Saturday he had chores to earn his allowance. We opened a savings account for him, encouraging him to save half of any money he received for birthdays or holidays. But unlike us at his age, Jason seemed uninterested in the concept of saving for the future. He wanted instant gratification, spending his money as soon as he got it. By the time Jason was 10, our real estate business had become quite successful. We had 15 employees and had expanded to 2 additional offices in neighboring counties. Our financial situation was comfortable, but Harold and I maintained our modest lifestyle. We upgraded to a larger home in a good school district, but it was still reasonable for our income. We drove practical cars that we kept for many years. Our one indulgence was travel. We believed experiencing different places and cultures was the best education for Jason. We took family vacations twice a year, visiting national parks, major cities, and occasionally international destinations. During a trip to the Grand Canyon, when Jason was 12, Harold and I thought we had finally gotten through to him about appreciating experiences over material things. As we watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in breathtaking colors, Jason seemed genuinely moved. But the next day he was back to complaining that his friends got more expensive gifts than he did. As Jason entered his teenage years, we decided to send him to a private school known for its character development program. The tuition was steep, but we believed the investment in his education and character was worth it. The school required community service hours, which we hoped would help Jason develop empathy and gratitude. For a while, it seemed to be working. Jason joined the school's volunteer club and spent weekends helping at a local food bank. His grades were excellent, and his teachers praised his intelligence and charm. Harold and I were cautiously optimistic that he was maturing. When Jason turned 16, we faced a dilemma. Most of his classmates received cars for their 16th birthdays, many of them luxury models. Harold and I discussed it at length and decided to buy Jason a used sedan, reliable but not flashy. We explained that if he wanted something more expensive, he would need to get a part-time job and save for it. Jason was furious. He accused us of being cheap despite our success. "Everyone knows your business makes millions," he said during one heated argument. "You just do not want me to have nice things." It was the first time we realized that Jason had a distorted view of our finances. Yes, our business had grown substantially, but we had always reinvested profits and lived well below our means. During his senior year of high school, Jason applied to several prestigious universities. He was accepted to Princeton, his first choice. Harold and I were immensely proud and agreed to cover his tuition and reasonable living expenses. We set a monthly allowance that we thought was generous while still teaching responsibility. It was during college that the first truly troubling signs emerged. 3 months into his freshman year, Jason called asking for more money. When we asked why, he admitted he had spent his entire semester allowance on designer clothes and nights out with his new friends. Harold firmly explained that we would not be sending additional funds until the next scheduled payment, and suggested Jason find a campus job if he needed more spending money. 2 days later, the dean of students called us. Jason had been caught trying to sell items he had stolen from his roommate's closet. We were horrified and immediately drove to the campus. After a long meeting with the dean and the roommate's family, we managed to resolve the situation without involving the police. The roommate's parents were gracious, accepting Jason's tearful apology and our offer to replace the items and pay additional compensation for their trouble. On the long, silent drive home, I watched Harold's knuckles turn white as he gripped the steering wheel. Later that night, he confided his fears. "We have failed him somehow, Brittany." Where did we go wrong? I had no answer. We had tried to raise him with the same values we held, but something had not taken root. After that incident, Jason seemed to improve. He joined a business fraternity, maintained good grades, and even started a small campus business organizing events for other student groups. We cautiously began to think the stolen items incident had been rock bottom, and he was turning his life around. When Jason graduated with honors, Harold and I were brimming with pride. He had been accepted to a prestigious MBA program, and we agreed to support him through graduate school as well. At his graduation party, Harold took Jason aside for a heart-to-heart talk. I overheard him telling our son, "We have given you every advantage, Jason. Now it is time to build something for yourself, as your mother and I did." Jason nodded earnestly, and for a moment I believed he had finally internalized the lessons we had tried to teach him all his life. Looking back, I realized that was the last time I saw genuine hope in Harold's eyes regarding our son. Jason met Tiffany at a charity gala during his second year of business school. He had volunteered to help organize the event as part of his graduate assistant duties, and Tiffany was there with her parents, Martha and George Stewart, who were major donors to the university. The Stewarts owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. When Jason brought Tiffany home to meet us for the first time, I was struck by her beauty and polish. She was tall and slender with perfect blonde hair and impeccable designer clothes. She was polite, but somewhat reserved, and I noticed she checked her phone constantly throughout dinner. Harold tried to engage her in conversation about her interests and family, but her answers were brief and revealed little about her character. After they left, Harold and I discussed our impressions. "She seems very different from the girls Jason dated in college," I said carefully. Harold was more direct. "She looks expensive," he replied, frowning, "and not particularly interested in us." Our concerns grew when Jason invited us to dinner at the Stewarts' home 2 months later. Their house was more like a mansion, with a circular driveway lined with imported Italian statues. A uniformed maid answered the door and led us to a living room where crystal chandeliers hung above furniture that appeared to have never been sat on. Martha Stewart made an entrance worthy of a movie star, descending the curved staircase in a cocktail dress more appropriate for a gala than a family dinner. She kissed my cheeks and looked me up and down her eyes, lingering on my sensible shoes. George Stewart was quieter, a tall man who seemed perpetually worried. He shook Harold's hand firmly enough, but spent most of the evening answering emails on his phone. During dinner served by waitstaff in a formal dining room, Martha dominated the conversation with stories about their recent trips to Monaco and the south of France. She mentioned casual purchases that cost more than our first house. When Harold politely mentioned our real estate business, Martha cut him off. "Real estate? Oh, how interesting. George bought me a shopping center for our anniversary last year. I never go there, of course, but it is nice knowing it is mine." As dessert was served, Martha turned her attention to Jason and Tiffany's relationship. "They make such a perfect couple, do not? Jason, is so ambitious, just like my George was at his age." Then she looked directly at me, and unlike some people, I have always believed in supporting my daughter's happiness, whatever the cost. On the drive home, Harold and I were mostly silent, processing the evening. Finally, Harold said, "I do not think they know the first thing about the value of money." I agreed, adding, "Did you notice how George barely spoke? It is like Martha runs everything, and he just pays the bills." 6 months later, Jason called to announce his engagement to Tiffany. He sounded excited but also nervous. "Tiffany and her mother have some ideas for the wedding," he said. "They would like to meet with you to discuss how we will split the costs." The meeting was at an exclusive country club where the Stewarts were members. Martha arrived with a wedding planner who carried a thick binder. "We have already reserved the Plaza Hotel in New York for the reception," Martha announced, before we had even ordered our drinks. "June is their busiest season, so we had to book 2 years in advance and pay a substantial deposit." Harold nearly choked on his water. 2 years? That seems like a long engagement. Martha waved her hand dismissively. "Quality venues require planning." Now about the guest list. "We are thinking 500 people minimum. The Stewarts have a certain social standing to maintain." By the end of that lunch, Martha had outlined plans for a wedding that would cost roughly the same as a small apartment building. Harold tried several times to suggest more reasonable alternatives, but Martha steamrolled over him. The wedding planner just kept nodding and adding items to her list. In the car afterward, Harold was visibly upset. "That was not a discussion. That was a hostage situation," he said. We agreed to set a firm limit on what we would contribute, which was still a very generous amount. When we told Jason our decision, he seemed relieved rather than disappointed. "I understand, Dad. The whole thing has gotten out of hand, but Tiffany really wants to make her mother happy. It was the first glimpse I had into the dynamic that would come to dominate our son's marriage. Tiffany trying to please Martha, and Jason trying to please Tiffany regardless of the cost. The wedding itself was every bit as extravagant as Martha had planned. 500 guests, many of whom Jason and Tiffany barely knew. A 10-tier cake that cost more than my first car. Flowers flown in from South America. Harold and I felt completely out of place despite being parents of the groom. Martha had seated us at a table, far from the main action with distant Stewart relatives, who seemed equally uncomfortable. After the wedding, Jason and Tiffany moved into a luxury apartment in the city. We offered to help them with a down payment on a house, instead suggesting they build equity rather than spending so much on rent. Jason listened politely but declined. Tiffany wants to be close to her favorite shopping district, he explained. We started seeing less and less of Jason. When we did get together, Tiffany was often not feeling well or had a prior commitment. Jason began to cancel our traditional Sunday dinners, usually with last-minute texts claiming work emergencies. Meanwhile, social media told a different story. Tiffany frequently posted photos of elaborate dinner parties at Martha and George's home designer shopping sprees with her mother and weekend trips to exclusive resorts. Jason appeared in many of these images looking progressively more like George Stewart dressed expensively, but somehow diminished, standing slightly behind his wife and mother-in-law. About a year into their marriage, Jason called asking for a loan. It is just a temporary cash flow issue, he assured us. Tiffany had some unexpected expenses, and my year-end bonus has not come through yet. Harold asked more questions, and discovered the unexpected expenses were a $20,000 handbag and matching shoes that Martha had convinced Tiffany she absolutely needed for an upcoming charity event. Harold refused the loan, suggesting Jason and Tiffany create a budget based on their actual income rather than anticipated bonuses. Jason was furious. "You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Why are you being so stingy?" Tiffany's parents help them whenever they ask. "That is their choice," Harold replied calmly. "Our choice is to help you learn to live within your means. Financial discipline is a form of love too, son." After that conversation, we did not hear from Jason for 3 months. When he finally called, it was to invite us to Thanksgiving dinner at Martha and George's house. We accepted, hoping to repair the rift. The dinner was uncomfortable from the start. Martha made several passive-aggressive comments about parents who withhold support from their children. George drank too much and stared vacantly at the football game on a massive television in the corner of the dining room. Tiffany seemed nervous, constantly looking to her mother for approval. As we were leaving, Martha cornered me in the foyer. "You know, Brittany, some people just cannot bear to part with their money even for their children's happiness. George and I believe family comes first always." Her smile did not reach her eyes. Over the next 2 years, the pattern continued. Jason became increasingly distant, choosing to spend holidays with the Stewarts rather than making time to see us. When we did see him, he seemed stressed and unhappy, though he would never admit it. He talked constantly about work pressure and the need to move up to the next level. Harold tried several times to have heart-to-heart conversations with our son. "Are you happy, Jason?" "Really happy," he would ask. Jason would brush off these questions, changing the subject to his latest deal or purchase. Martha's influence on Jason grew stronger. He began to adopt her materialistic outlook and dismissive attitude toward anyone who did not share it. He joined the same exclusive clubs as the Stewarts and took up golf, which he had always previously ridiculed as a waste of a good afternoon. Most concerning was how Jason's attitude toward money changed. The young man who had once started a small, successful campus business now seemed to view money not as something to be earned and invested wisely, but as a tool for showing status and buying approval, particularly from Martha and Tiffany. When Harold turned 65, we threw a small party at our home. We invited Jason and Tiffany, of course, but they arrived 2 hours late because Tiffany had had a spa appointment she could not possibly reschedule. They stayed for exactly 45 minutes, during which Jason spent most of the time on his phone and Tiffany complained about the catering. As they were leaving much earlier than any other guest, I overheard Tiffany on the phone with her mother. "Yes, we are leaving now. No, nothing special, just cake from a local bakery." "I know, right? Not even a proper event planner. We will be there in 30 minutes. They were heading to Martha's house for a dinner party she had deliberately scheduled on the same night as Harold's birthday. When I mentioned this to Harold later, he just shook his head sadly. "We are losing him, Brittany. I am not sure he even realizes what is happening." It was the last birthday Harold would celebrate. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday in April. Harold had been feeling unusually tired and had developed a persistent cough that would not respond to over-the-counter remedies. Our family doctor ordered tests, and the results were devastating. Stage 4 lung cancer already spread to his liver. The oncologist gave him 6 months to a year. We sat in our car in the hospital parking lot, rain drumming on the roof, holding hands in silence. Finally, Harold spoke. "We need to tell Jason." I called our son immediately, but the call went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call back as soon as possible, trying to keep my voice steady. "Your father and I need to speak with you. It is important, Jason." 3 days passed, with no response. I called again, then texted. Finally, Jason replied with the text, "Super busy with work this week. Can it wait until next weekend?" Harold took the phone from my hands and called Jason himself. When our son answered, Harold said, simply, "I have cancer, son. Stage 4. We need to see you." Jason visited the following day alone. He explained that Tiffany was too emotional to come along. He sat stiffly in our living room as Harold explained the prognosis and treatment options. Jason asked few questions, checking his watch several times. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, before leaving his hand already on the doorknob. "Just time with you," Harold replied. "That is the most valuable thing now." Jason nodded and promised to visit again soon. He did come back, but his visits were brief and infrequent. Each time he had an excuse for why he could not stay longer, or why Tiffany could not accompany him. Business trips, charity events, renovation work at their apartment. Meanwhile, Harold began chemotherapy. The treatments were brutal, leaving him exhausted and nauseated. I took a leave of absence from our business to care for him full-time. Our staff was amazing, stepping up to keep everything running smoothly, so we did not have to worry about work on top of everything else. I called Jason regularly with updates on his father's condition. Sometimes he answered, sometimes not. When he did visit, he seemed uncomfortable, unsure what to say or do in the face of his father's illness. He would bring expensive gifts, rare books, or gourmet food baskets that Harold was too sick to enjoy, rather than simply sitting with his father and talking. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of treatment, Harold and I were sitting on our back porch. Despite his weakness, he had insisted on going outside to watch the sunset. "I do not want to miss any of them now," he said. As the sky turned golden, then pink, then deep purple, Harold squeezed my hand. "I want to talk about Jason," he said. We discussed our concerns about our son, his relationship with Tiffany, and her parents, and his attitude toward money. Harold was quiet for a long time after I finished speaking. Finally, he said, "I think we have been enabling him, Brittany, hoping he would change instead of holding him accountable." Over the next few weeks between treatments, Harold met with our attorney. He made changes to his will and our financial arrangements. "I need to know you will be protected," he told me. "Jason will get his inheritance, but not in a way that could be squandered or taken advantage of." As Harold grew weaker, our home filled with medical equipment, a hospital bed in our bedroom, oxygen tanks, a wheelchair for the days when walking was too difficult. Through it all, Harold maintained his dignity and even his sense of humor. "Not exactly the retirement we planned," he joked one morning as I helped him dress. Jason's visits became even less frequent as Harold's appearance changed. The strong, vibrant man was now thin and pale. The few times Jason did come, he seemed almost afraid to look directly at his father, as if the reality of mortality was too much to face. By contrast, our friends rallied around us. People from the community, business associates, neighbors, former employees, all came to visit, bringing food offering to run errands, or simply sitting with Harold to give me a break. The contrast between the support of these people, some just casual acquaintances, and the absence of our only son was heartbreaking. 4 months after the diagnosis, Harold's oncologist suggested hospice care. The cancer had progressed faster than expected, and treatment was no longer effective. We decided Harold would remain at home, with hospice nurses visiting daily. I called Jason with the news. "The doctors say it will be a matter of weeks now," I told him, my voice breaking. "Please come. Your father asks for you every day." Jason promised to visit that weekend. Friday came and went, with no word from him. Saturday morning, he texted that he had to fly to Chicago for an emergency meeting, but would try to come Sunday. Sunday brought another text, with another excuse. Meanwhile, Harold was slipping away. There were moments of clarity when we would talk about our life together, reminiscing about our early struggles and successes, our travels, our love. Other times, he would drift in and out of consciousness, the pain medication making him confused. During one clear moment, Harold motioned me closer to his bed. "Promise me something, Brittany," he whispered. "Anything," I replied, holding his increasingly frail hand. "Promise you will stand up for yourself. With Jason, with everyone. You have always been stronger than you know." I promised, through my tears, not fully understanding then what he meant. I would learn soon enough. The final days were peaceful thanks to the hospice team. Harold was rarely conscious, but seemed comfortable. I sat by his bed, constantly talking to him, playing his favorite music, reading aloud from books he loved. I had tried calling Jason several more times, leaving increasingly urgent messages. "Your father does not have much time left, Jason. Please come now if you want to say goodbye." Harold passed away on a quiet Thursday morning. He simply stopped breathing while I was holding his hand. The hospice nurse who was present said it was a peaceful end, that Harold had not suffered in those final moments. Through my fog of grief, I called Jason. This time he answered. When I told him his father was gone, there was a long silence. "Then I will have my assistant book me a flight for the funeral. Let me know when you have it arranged." No tears, no expression of regret for not being there. Just logistics. In that moment, I felt a strange combination of grief and clarity. The son we had raised was gone, replaced by someone I hardly recognized. Planning Harold's funeral was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Each decision, from the casket to the flowers to the music, felt monumentally important. I wanted everything to be perfect for my husband's final farewell. Our business partners and close friends helped me navigate the arrangements, providing both practical assistance and emotional support. The funeral was scheduled for Monday afternoon at the church where we had attended for 30 years. Harold had been clear about wanting a celebration of life rather than a mournful service, so I chose readings and music that reflected his optimistic spirit and strong faith. On Saturday evening, 2 days before the funeral, I received a text from Jason Mom. Something has come up. Tiffany's parents surprised us with a vacation to Cabo. It has been planned for months, non-refundable. Really bad timing. I will not be able to make it Monday. Can you postpone? I stared at my phone in disbelief. Postpone my husband's funeral for a beach vacation. I called Jason immediately, but he did not answer. I left a voicemail, my voice shaking with anger and grief. Jason, this is your father's funeral. There is no rescheduling. Please reconsider what you are doing. He texted back an hour later. Sorry, Mom. Tiffany is really looking forward to this trip. She says I need the break after all the stress. We will plan a visit when we get back. Love you. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about what Harold would say, how he would handle this situation. Around dawn, I remembered his words. Promise you will stand up for yourself. For the first time since his death, I felt a flicker of something beyond grief, a spark of resolve. Sunday morning, I received another shock. Our neighbor's daughter, who was friends with Tiffany on social media, came over with cookies and a concerned expression. Mrs. Wilson, I thought you should see this, she said, showing me her phone. There on the screen was a photo posted just hours earlier, Jason and Tiffany, at what appeared to be a beach party. Red plastic cups in hand, sunburned, and smiling widely. The caption read, Sometimes you just need to escape. Best vacation ever. Thanks to Martha and George, blessed living our best life. The timestamp showed it was posted at approximately the same time Jason had texted me about the non-refundable trip. They had not been surprised with the vacation. They had chosen it over Harold's funeral. The day of the funeral arrived with clear skies and gentle breezes, as if nature itself was paying respect to Harold. Our church was filled to capacity. Business associates, friends, former clients, even competitors came to pay their respects. The outpouring of love for my husband was overwhelming. Throughout the service, I was acutely aware of the empty seat beside me where Jason should have been. People approached gently, offering condolences, then inevitably asking, Is Jason here? We would love to see him. I had prepared a simple response. He was unable to attend today. The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but I would not embarrass my son publicly despite his actions. Harold would not have wanted that. Harold's business partner of 30 years, Frank, delivered a beautiful eulogy, highlighting Harold's integrity, generosity, and unwavering principles. Harold believed in doing the right thing, even when it was the hard thing, Frank said, his voice cracking with emotion. He built his business and his life on that foundation. After the service, many people shared stories about how Harold had touched their lives. A young woman told me how Harold had given her father a job when no one else would hire him after a business failure. Mr. Wilson said everyone deserves a second chance, she said. He changed our family's future with his kindness. A competitor spoke of Harold's ethical business practices. In an industry that can sometimes reward cutting corners, Harold never compromised his values. He made all of us better by his example. These tributes were balm to my wounded heart, but the absence of our only child cast a long shadow over the day. Back at our home after the burial, close friends and family gathered to share a meal and more memories of Harold. Several people asked to see recent photos of Jason, not knowing about the rift that had grown between him and his parents. I showed pictures from Christmas 2 years earlier, the last holiday he had spent with us, rather than the Stewarts. As the last guests left hugging me tightly and extracting promises to call if I needed anything, the reality of my new situation began to sink in. I was alone in the house Harold and I had shared for 20 years. The silence was deafening. I wandered from room to room touching Harold's things, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his favorite coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet, his gardening hat hanging by the back door. Each item a knife to my heart, a reminder of the life we had built together and the future we would never share. In his home office, I sat in Harold's chair, surrounded by photos of our life together. On his desk was a picture from Jason's college graduation. Harold stood tall and proud between Jason and me, his arms around us both, his smile wide and genuine. I traced Harold's face with my finger, remembering that day how hopeful we had all been. "What happened to our boy Harold?" I whispered to the empty room. "Where did we lose him?" That night I slept on Harold's side of the bed, my face buried in his pillow that still held a trace of his scent. My grief felt like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But beneath the sorrow was a growing sense of determination. Harold had seen something in me that I had yet to fully recognize in my self-strength. The following morning I woke to more social media posts of Jason and Tiffany's Mexican vacation, sunset margaritas, jet ski adventures, couples massage on the beach. Each smiling photo, a fresh wound, each carefree caption, a reminder of the funeral he had missed. I put my phone away and made myself breakfast, something I had not done since Harold's diagnosis. As I ate, I made a promise to myself and to Harold's memory. I would not let grief destroy me. I would not let Jason's betrayal define me. I would find the strength Harold always believed I had. Little did I know how soon that strength would be tested. A week after the funeral, I was slowly establishing a new routine for myself. Mornings were the hardest. For 45 years I had woken up to Harold, his smile, his voice, the simple comfort of his presence. Now there was only emptiness beside me. I had returned to the office, part-time, finding solace in work and the company of our employees. Everyone had been incredibly understanding, giving me space to grieve while keeping me involved enough to provide distraction from my loss. That Friday evening, I was sitting in my living room with a cup of tea and one of Harold's favorite books when my phone pinged with a text. It was from Jason, the first contact since his absence at the funeral. "Hi, Mom. Hope you are doing okay. Need to talk to you about something important. Tiffany's mom has her 60th birthday coming up. They want to buy her a vacation home in Aspen. We need $500 Kelvins for our portion. Inheritance money would really help. Can we discuss tomorrow?" I read the message 3 times, unable to comprehend the audacity. My husband Jason's father had been in the ground for barely a week, and his first communication was a request for $500,000 for his mother-in-law's birthday present. Not even a question about how I was coping with my loss. Not a word of regret for missing the funeral. Before I could respond, another text came through. "Tiffany says Martha has had her eye on this specific property for years. It would mean a lot to her. Dad would have wanted to help." The invocation of Harold's wishes sent a surge of anger through me, unlike anything I had ever experienced. How dare he presume what Harold would have wanted? Harold, who had spent his final months watching his son avoid him, who had died without the chance to say goodbye to his only child. I set my phone down without replying. My hands were shaking too badly to type. I needed time to process this request and my response. The next morning, more texts arrived from Jason's mom. "Did you get my message? We need to move quickly on this property. Another buyer is interested. And then, it is technically our money anyway. Dad left it to us right. You are just holding it." I still did not respond. Instead, I went for a long walk in the park where Harold and I used to stroll on Sunday afternoons. The familiar paths brought both comfort and fresh pain. I found a bench overlooking the duck pond and sat there thinking about Jason's request and what it revealed about how he viewed me, his father's memory, and his inheritance. When I returned home, there was a voicemail from Tiffany. Her voice was sugary sweet, but with an unmistakable edge. "Brittany, Jason said he has not heard back from you about our little request. Martha is so excited about this surprise. We would hate to disappoint her. I am sure you understand how important family is. Call us back as soon as you can." "Okay." By Sunday afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly. More texts from Jason, growing increasingly impatient. "Mom, why are you ignoring me? This is time sensitive." And then, "Is this about the funeral? I already explained why we could not make it. You need to move on." Move on. As if missing his father's funeral was equivalent to missing a dinner reservation. As if my grief was an inconvenience to his plans. The final straw came Sunday evening when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I answered cautiously, only to hear Martha Stewart's commanding voice. "Brittany, it is Martha. I understand there is some confusion about the funds Jason and Tiffany need for my birthday gift." I was so shocked I could not immediately respond. Martha continued, "I have had my eye on this Aspen property for years. It would be the perfect gesture from my daughter and son-in-law. Jason assured me that Harold left them well provided for." Finding my voice at last, I said Martha Harold's funeral was just last week. This does not seem like an appropriate time to discuss such matters. Martha made a dismissive sound. "Grief is no excuse for selfishness, Brittany. Family helps family. Jason is trying to do something wonderful for his wife's mother. Are you really going to stand in the way of that?" "I need time to consider this request," I said, struggling to keep my tone level. "Harold and I worked our entire lives to build our savings. Decisions about large sums of money should not be made hastily. What is there to consider? It is just money, and from what Jason tells me, you have plenty. Unless," her voice took on a sly quality, "you are planning to keep it all for yourself." After ending that call, I sat in Harold's office, surrounded by mementos of our life together. Photos from the early days of our business awards Harold had received for his community service books on ethics and business principles that had guided his decisions. I opened his desk drawer and found a leather-bound journal I had given him years ago. I had not known he actually used it. Inside were his private thoughts, business ideas, and in the final pages, reflections on his illness and concerns about Jason. One entry, dated just 3 weeks before his death, read, "Met with Edward, our attorney, today. Adjusted the trust provisions. Worried about Jason's judgment, especially with Tiffany and her family's influence. Need to protect Brittany. She does not always see how people try to take advantage of her generous nature. Hope I am doing the right thing." I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face, but with a growing sense of clarity. Harold had anticipated this. He had taken steps to protect both me and, in a way, Jason from himself. My phone pinged once more. Another text from Jason. "Mom, I need an answer by tomorrow morning. The real estate agent says the other buyer is ready to move. 500,000. That is nothing compared to what you and Dad have. Stop being difficult." That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations with Jason, remembering Harold's words about standing up for myself, weighing my options and responsibilities. By morning, I had made my decision. I would not respond to Jason's texts or calls. Instead, I would take action. Harold had prepared me for this moment, whether he knew it or not. Now I needed to be as strong as he always believed I was. One final text came in as I was getting dressed. "Last chance, Mom. If you do not transfer the money by noon, do not expect to hear from us again. Tiffany says we have done everything we could. The ball is in your court now." The ultimatum only strengthened my resolve. I looked at our wedding picture on the dresser Harold's kind eyes and steady smile. "I will make you proud," I whispered. Then I picked up my phone not to reply to Jason, but to make a very different call. That Monday morning, I arrived at our bank when they opened at 9. Harold and I had worked with the same financial institution for decades, and the manager Robert had attended Harold's funeral. He welcomed me with a sympathetic smile and sincere condolences. "What can I help you with today, Brittany?" he asked after we were seated in his office. "I need to secure our accounts," I explained, then briefly outlined Jason's demand and my concerns. Robert's expression grew serious. "I am very sorry you are dealing with this on top of your loss. We can certainly help protect your assets." Over the next hour, we went through each account. Following Robert's advice, I removed Jason as an authorized user on all accounts, changed online banking passwords, and set up additional security measures, including two-factor authentication and alerts for any unusual activity. "Harold had set up most of your accounts with right of survivorship," Robert explained. "This means everything transferred directly to you upon his death. The only exceptions are the trust accounts, which have their own provisions and protections." From the bank, I drove directly to the office of Edward Michaels, our attorney, for the past 20 years. Edward had been a close friend of Harold's, as well as our legal advisor. He greeted me warmly, his kind eyes crinkling with concern. "Brittany, how are you holding up?" he asked, leading me to his office where a pot of tea was already waiting. Harold must have mentioned my preference for tea over coffee. I told Edward about Jason's demand and showed him the texts. Edward's expression darkened as he read them. "Unfortunately, this does not surprise me," he said. Harold was concerned about exactly this sort of situation. Edward pulled out a thick file and began explaining the provisions Harold had made. "Your husband was a very thoughtful man who wanted to ensure you were protected," he said. "The bulk of your assets are either in your name directly or in a trust with you as the primary beneficiary and trustee." He showed me documents detailing the trust Harold had established for Jason. "This is a spendthrift trust," Edward explained. "It means Jason cannot access the principal, only the income generated by the trust assets, and he cannot borrow against it or use it as collateral. Harold specifically designed it this way to prevent large lump sum withdrawals or pressure from third parties. According to the terms, Jason would receive quarterly distributions of income from the trust starting 6 months after Harold's death. The principal would remain protected until Jason reached age 55, with a provision that it could be released earlier only for specific purposes, like education for his children or a medical emergency. There is also a clause allowing you as trustee to withhold distributions if there is evidence of substance abuse, gambling, or undue influence from others, Edward added. Harold was quite thorough. I felt a rush of gratitude for my husband's foresight. So, legally, I cannot give Jason the $500,000 he is asking for, even if I wanted to. You could give him money from your personal funds if you chose to, Edward clarified, but nothing from the trust. And based on what you have shown me, I would strongly advise against giving him anything right now. This demand is inappropriate in timing and nature. Before I left, Edward helped me draft a clear, factual letter to Jason, explaining the terms of his father's will and trust. The letter stated that no large lump sums were available to him under the terms established by Harold, and that all communication regarding the estate should go through Edward's office going forward. This creates a buffer between you and Jason, Edward explained. It allows you to step back from the emotional aspects and let me handle the legal and financial details. My next stop was to meet with our financial advisor, Margaret Chen. Margaret had helped Harold and me plan for retirement and beyond. She had also attended the funeral, bringing a beautiful orchid and memories of working with Harold. Margaret reviewed our investment portfolio and helped me understand exactly where we stood financially. While Harold and I had built substantial wealth over our decades in business, it was carefully invested and allocated. Taking out $500,000 would actually require liquidating some investments, potentially with tax consequences. Your financial house is in excellent order, Margaret assured me. Harold made sure of that. But large, unexpected withdrawals are never a good idea, especially for non-essential expenses like a vacation home for your son's mother-in-law. By late afternoon, I had taken concrete steps to protect myself financially and legally. I felt exhausted, but also strangely empowered. On the drive home, I decided to take one more protective measure. I stopped at an electronics store and purchased a new phone and number. My old phone had not stopped buzzing with texts and calls from Jason, Tiffany, and even Martha throughout the day. At home, I emailed our closest friends, explaining that I was changing my phone number for personal reasons and would share the new one with them directly. I set up my new phone and turned off the old one, placing it in a drawer in Harold's office. That evening, as I was making a simple dinner for myself, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jason standing on the porch, his expression a mixture of anger and determination. For a moment I considered not answering, but then remembered Harold's words about standing up for myself. I opened the door but did not invite him in. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Why are you not answering your phone?" he demanded. "And why were you at the bank and the lawyer's office today?" So he had been tracking my movements, perhaps through banking alerts he had previously set up or through contacts at our regular places of business. "I have been taking care of necessary arrangements following your father's death," I replied. "As for my phone, I decided to change my number. Too many unwanted calls." Jason's face flushed. "This is about the money, is not it. You are trying to keep it all for yourself. Dad would have wanted to help us with this purchase. You are dishonoring his memory by being so selfish." The accusation stung, but I held firm. Your father was very specific about how he wanted his estate handled. I am honoring his wishes exactly. Edward has prepared a letter explaining everything. You should receive it tomorrow. Jason pushed past me into the house. "I do not need a letter. I need the $500,000 that is rightfully mine. Tiffany's mother is expecting this gift, and we have already told her we are contributing." "That was premature of you," I said, following him into the living room. "Your father's trust is very clear. There are no lump sum distributions available to you." Trust. What trust? Dad would never have put restrictions on my inheritance. Jason was shouting now, his face red with anger. "Your father loved you, Jason. The trust was his way of protecting your inheritance, ensuring it would be there for you long term." Jason paced the room, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "This is ridiculous. I am 42 years old, not some irresponsible child. I should have full access to what is mine." "Edward will explain the details," I said, maintaining my calm. "For now, I need to ask you to leave. This conversation is not productive. I am not going anywhere until you agree to transfer the money," Jason said, dropping onto the sofa. "Martha is expecting an answer tonight." "Then Martha will be disappointed," I replied. "I cannot give you money that is legally bound in a trust, and I will not liquidate my own investments to buy an Aspen vacation home for someone I barely know." Jason's expression turned ugly. "You never liked Tiffany or her family. You have always been jealous of them, of their lifestyle. You and Dad, with your middle-class values and penny-pinching ways. It was embarrassing growing up with parents who could have afforded so much more but chose to live like we were barely getting by." His words revealed so much about how he viewed the life Harold and I had built, the values we had tried to instill in him. Somewhere along the way we had failed to transmit what truly mattered to us, or perhaps the influence of the Stewarts had simply been stronger. "Your father and I worked hard for everything we achieved," I said. "We made conscious choices about how to live and how to use our resources. We never pretended to be anything other than what we were." Jason stood suddenly. "I will fight this. I will contest the will claim you manipulated Dad when he was sick. Elder abuse, diminished capacity. There are ways to break a trust." "You are welcome to try," I said, walking to the door and opening it. "But your father was of sound mind, and everything was properly executed with witnesses. Now please leave. If you want to discuss this further, you can contact Edward." Jason stormed past me but turned at the bottom of the porch steps. "This is not over. Tiffany's father knows powerful attorneys. You will regret this, Mom." After he left, I double-checked that all doors and windows were locked, then sat at the kitchen table, shaking with the aftermath of adrenaline. The confrontation had been painful, but also clarifying. The son I had raised, the boy who had once helped his father build birdhouses in our backyard, who had learned to ride a bike in our driveway, who had made me handmade Mother's Day cards, was gone. In his place was a stranger, whose values and priorities I barely recognized. The next day, I contacted a security company and had a modern system installed, including cameras at all entry points. I did not think Jason would become physically threatening, but his anger had been intense, and I preferred to err on the side of caution. I also filed a report, with the local police not pressing charges, but creating a record of Jason's threatening behavior, just in case. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, having seen similar family conflicts over inheritances before. "It is good you are taking precautions," he advised. "These situations can escalate, especially when large sums of money are involved. Keep documenting everything, and do not hesitate to call us if you feel unsafe." Over the next few days, I learned that Jason was indeed exploring ways to challenge Harold's will and trust. Edward called to inform me that an attorney representing Jason had contacted him, requesting all documents related to the estate and questioning Harold's mental capacity during the final changes to his will. "This is standard posturing," Edward assured me. "We have excellent documentation of Harold's mental clarity, including statements from his doctors. The changes to the will and trust were made months before his condition deteriorated, and everything was properly witnessed and executed." Meanwhile, Jason had taken to social media to wage a different kind of battle. He posted vague but pointed comments about elderly parents being manipulated and family members showing their true colors after a death. He never mentioned me by name, but his meaning was clear to anyone who knew our situation. More disturbingly, Martha Stewart had apparently begun contacting my friends, telling them a twisted version of events in which I was hoarding the family wealth and refusing to honor Harold's wishes for his son. Several friends called to ask about these strange conversations, expressing concern and support for me. "Martha called me yesterday," my friend Susan reported. "She said you were suffering from depression after Harold's death and making irrational financial decisions. She suggested we should encourage you to seek professional help. I told her you seemed perfectly rational to me and that your financial decisions were none of my business anyway. The smear campaign was hurtful but ultimately ineffective. The people who truly knew me and had known Harold understood what was happening. Many of our neighbors aware of Jason's angry visit checked on me regularly. One retired police officer who lived across the street made a point of being visible in his front yard whenever unfamiliar cars slowed near my home. Through it all, I found myself growing stronger. Each decision I made to protect myself and Harold's legacy reinforced my independence. Each challenge I faced and overcame built my confidence. I began to understand what Harold had seen in me all along, the strength I had always possessed, but rarely needed to display so explicitly. 1 month after Harold's death, I received notice that Jason had formally filed a lawsuit contesting the will and trust. Edward was unworried. "This is a nuisance filing," he explained. "Based on the documentation we have, the court will almost certainly uphold Harold's wishes, but it may take time to resolve, and you should be prepared for some unpleasant depositions." I was ready. The woman who had stood alone at her husband's funeral while her son partied on a beach was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who had found her voice and her strength, someone who would honor Harold's memory by standing firm against manipulation and entitlement. "Bring it on," I told Edward. "I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. Harold trusted me to handle this, and I will not let him down." As summer faded into fall, I established a new normal for myself. Each morning, I would wake early and walk through the neighborhood before the Texas heat became too intense. These walks gave me time to think, to grieve, and increasingly to plan for my future. 6 months had passed since Harold's death, and while the pain of losing him remained, it had evolved from a sharp, constant ache to a gentler sadness that coexisted with happy memories and newfound purpose. On the recommendation of my doctor, I had joined a grief support group that met weekly at the community center. The group was led by a compassionate counselor named Diane, who had lost her own spouse years earlier. Under her guidance, we shared our experiences, our struggles, and our small victories in navigating life after loss. In the group, I found understanding without judgment. No one questioned my tears or suggested I should move on after a certain time frame. Most importantly, I formed friendships with people who truly understood the complexity of grief, its unpredictable waves and gradual transformations. Eleanor, a 72-year-old widow, became a particular friend. We often went for coffee after group meetings, sharing stories of our husbands and the challenges of rebuilding a life alone. Eleanor had been through a similar experience with her son, following her husband's death, though in her case, reconciliation had eventually been possible. "He was not himself for a while," Eleanor explained one afternoon as we sat in a quiet cafe. "Grief does strange things to people. Sometimes the people we expect the most support from are the ones least equipped to provide it." Her words gave me a new perspective on Jason's behavior, though they did not excuse it. Perhaps beneath his materialism and entitlement was a man who simply did not know how to process the loss of his father. It was something to consider, at least. I had also begun volunteering twice a week at the hospital where Harold had received treatment. I worked in the cancer ward, providing company and conversation to patients undergoing chemotherapy. The work was emotionally challenging but deeply fulfilling. I felt connected to Harold in those rooms, as if I was extending the compassion he had always shown to others. Meanwhile, the legal battle with Jason had reached a predictable conclusion. After reviewing all the documentation and taking depositions, the judge had dismissed Jason's lawsuit, upholding Harold's will and trust exactly as written, Edward called with the news, his voice triumphant. The judge was quite clear, he reported. Harold's testamentary capacity was never in question. The medical records and witness statements confirmed his sound mind when making the estate plans. Additionally, the judge noted that the trust actually benefits Jason in the long run by preserving assets for his future. Jason had been ordered to pay legal costs, a decision that apparently caused financial strain. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he and Tiffany were facing money troubles. They had been counting on an inheritance windfall that never materialized, and their lifestyle had always exceeded their income. More surprisingly, Martha and George Stewart were having financial problems of their own. The luxury car dealerships had been hit hard by changes in the market, and rumors circulated about significant debt and possible bankruptcy. The Aspen vacation home that had caused so much conflict was no longer mentioned. I took no pleasure in these difficulties, but I did see them as confirmation that Harold's careful planning had been wise. Had Jason received unrestricted access to his inheritance, those funds might well have been squandered on the Stewarts' increasingly unstable financial situation. One crisp October morning, nearly 7 months after Harold's funeral, I was in the garden planting bulbs for spring when a car pulled into my driveway. I stood brushing soil from my hands and was shocked to see Jason getting out of a modest sedan, not the luxury sports car he had been driving during our last encounter. He approached cautiously, stopping several feet away. I noticed immediately how different he looked, thinner and somehow less polished, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt rather than the designer clothes he had favored in recent years. "Mom," he said, his voice subdued, "can we talk?" I invited him inside my heart, racing with a mixture of hope and apprehension. In the kitchen, I made coffee, giving myself time to process this unexpected visit. Jason sat at the table looking around the familiar room as if seeing it for the first time. "You planted those new rose bushes out front," he observed. "They look nice." "Your father always wanted yellow roses," I replied. "I finally got around to it this year." An awkward silence fell between us. Finally, Jason spoke. "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. For missing Dad's funeral. For the way I acted afterward. For the lawsuit. For everything." I waited, saying nothing, giving him space to continue. "Tiffany and I separated 2 months ago," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "She moved back in with her parents. The lawyer fees for the lawsuit took most of our savings. And then George's business started failing. It turns out they were much more leveraged than anyone knew. I felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness for my son's pain, but also a sense that reality was finally breaking through the bubble he had been living in. The thing is, Jason continued losing. Tiffany made me realize how much I had already lost. Dad. You. The person I used to be before I got caught up in the Stewart's world. His voice broke slightly, and I saw tears in his eyes. I was so angry when Dad died. Not just sad, but angry. At him for leaving, at you for being the one he confided in, at myself for wasting so much time. I could not face the funeral, because I could not face any of those feelings. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from Jason in years, the first real glimpse of the son I remembered. The money was never really about the money, he admitted. It was about proving something to Tiffany and Martha, about being the big shot who could afford an extravagant gift. When you said no, when I learned about the trust, it felt like Dad did not trust me, like one final rejection. I took a deep breath. Your father loved you, Jason. The trust was about protection, not control. He saw what was happening with your relationship with the Stewarts. He worried you were losing yourself. Jason nodded slowly. He was right. I see that now. We talked for hours that day, having the most honest conversation we had shared in years. Jason acknowledged his materialistic transformation and the wedge it had driven between us. I admitted that Harold and I had perhaps enabled some of his behavior by providing too much without enough accountability in his younger years. "I would like to try again," Jason said, as he prepared to leave, "to rebuild our relationship. I know it will take time, and I know I need to earn back your trust." "I would like that too," I replied. "But yes, it will take time, and there need to be boundaries." We agreed that Jason would begin seeing a therapist to work through his grief and the issues that had led to his entitled behavior. I suggested family counseling for the two of us as well, once he had made some progress individually. He readily agreed to both. In the months that followed, Jason and I cautiously rebuilt our relationship. There were setbacks and difficult conversations, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge. But there was also genuine effort and gradual change. Jason found a new job with a smaller firm, earning less but seemingly finding more satisfaction in the work. He moved to a modest apartment and began living within his means for perhaps the first time in his adult life. The quarterly distributions from Harold's trust, which had begun as scheduled, now covered his basic needs rather than luxury purchases. A year after Harold's death, I established the Harold Wilson Memorial Scholarship at our local community college, providing funding for students interested in ethical business practices. At the dedication ceremony, Jason stood beside me, genuinely proud of his father's legacy. On the first anniversary of Harold's funeral, I hosted a small dinner at our home for close friends and family, including Jason. We shared memories of Harold and celebrated the ways his influence continued in our lives. As I looked around the table at the faces of those who had supported me through the darkest year of my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and healing. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Jason helped me clear the dishes. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I think Dad would be proud of how you handled everything, how you stood your ground, how you protected what he built." "I think he would be proud of both of us," I replied, "of me for finding my strength, and of you for finding your way back to yourself." That night, after Jason left, I sat on the back porch where Harold and I had spent so many evenings watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky. I thought about the journey of the past year, the grief and betrayal, the strength and healing. I had learned that love does not mean giving people whatever they want. Sometimes the most loving choice is saying no. I had learned that grief changes us, sometimes bringing out the worst before it reveals the best. And I had learned that I was stronger than I ever imagined, capable of standing alone when necessary, but never truly alone while carrying Harold in my heart. These lessons had come at a terrible price, but they had transformed me. The woman who had once defined herself primarily as Harold's wife and Jason's mother now knew herself as Brittany, a person of substance and courage in her own right. As the first star appeared in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to Harold. I would continue to live with the integrity he had valued so highly. I would protect what we had built together, and I would keep my heart open to our son, balancing forgiveness with wisdom. If you have ever faced betrayal from someone you love, if you have ever had to find strength you did not know you possessed, if you have ever had to balance justice with mercy, I hope my story offers some comfort and guidance. The path is not easy, but healing is possible. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you found meaning in my experience, please comment below with a time when you had to stand firm for what was right, despite pressure to give in. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories of finding strength after betrayal. and share this with someone who might need encouragement to trust their own judgment and stand up for themselves. Remember, sometimes, the most loving thing we can do both for ourselves and others is to hold firm to our boundaries and values.